So Maggie mentions a little bit about me, a little bit about 2 Octobers. I am an organizer of the Denver Marketing Analytics Meetup, and actually the co-organizer, Ray Stein, is here. And maybe actually, Ray, you could throw a link in chat, because the kind of people that are showing up for this webinar, you might be interested in attending. And like everything else at this time, the Denver Marketing Analytics Meetup is all virtual. So no matter where you are, you could join in. And we cover topics, but it's fairly conversational, sort of collaborating on ideas. We always have a topic, but love to see you there. And I'm also a professor at DU and teach, among other things, analytics. Just one other thing I'll mention about 2 Octobers is we just became a certified B Corporation, which is a big milestone for us. It's something that we've been working on for a while. And if you're not familiar with B Corps are work together to use business as a force for good. And to achieve B Corp certification, we have to demonstrate that we've met the highest standards of social and environmental accountability. So it's very exciting for us. And if any of those words sound interesting to you, go check out the B Impact Assessment. It's free and a great way to get your organization started in this direction. So I got a lot to cover, so I better start covering it. So the things that we're going to talk about today, I'm really going to do mostly demo. This will be recorded, and Maggie will be sending out the recording. It usually takes a few days, like maybe as much as a week, before we've got it done and put up on YouTube. But in any case, you'll get the full recording of this. I'm going to switch away from the presentation to go through most of these topics. I'm going to cover a little bit about the configuration of Google Analytics. Then the main things I'll be talking about are Google Analytics as a tool for analysis, and I'll go a little bit deeper on measuring channel performance, and then time allowing, throw in a few additional hacks at the end. So first step, setting up for success. So I'll walk through these in the interface, but just sort of to introduce them. Enhanced e-commerce tracking. So there's 2 different ways to track e-commerce transactions in Google Analytics. There's the sort of legacy e-commerce tracking, and then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they introduced enhanced e-commerce. Enhanced e-commerce gives you much more detail on like everything from product views through to checkout and every step in between. So you really get funnel analysis of everything that users are doing in your site, interacting with products. And this webinar is geared towards e-commerce, but actually most of what I'm talking about will be relevant if you're not an e-commerce business or if e-commerce is not a primary part of your organization. But we definitely will be covering e-commerce topics. Google Signals, and I am just gonna go ahead and switch over to demo view just because I think it's a better, give you a better feeling. So I am in the Google Merchandise Store demo account, and this is something that you can follow along with. So if you go, if you just go Google Analytics demo account, and click here, and this link is also in the handout, and then access demo account, it'll give you access, like as long as you're in logged into Chrome it'll just take you straight in there. If you're using a different browser, it's going to ask for some kind of Google login. So everybody has access to this. Where I can, I'm going to be using this for examples. There are some things that I'll need a different account to show you examples of. But so this is the Google Analytics demo account. Really useful for just seeing, well, really honestly, just seeing an account with a lot of data and things set up pretty well. So if you want to, show your boss, like, here's what enhanced e-commerce looks like, really would be great if we could get this plugin for our e-commerce platform to get it working. So just pulling that up, e-commerce. So some of the things that I can see, like I can see shopping behavior, which is not something that I do not want a whole bunch of emails. Close that out. So I get to see all sessions with product views, sessions with add to cart. So like I mentioned, I just get a lot more detail on e-commerce interactions than I would with the regular e-commerce tracking. So if you don't have that fully working, and one part of that is checkout behavior. So with enhanced e-commerce, you can define steps, and you can say, like, this is something that has to be configured, but you can say, like, I want to know when people complete the billing and shipping page. I want to know when people can complete the payment page. And this is really valuable for understanding where you might be losing people in your checkout process. So one configuration setting. Google Signals is necessary for if you want to be able to see any kind of demographics data. And we'll be talking about this more later on. So if I go to demographics and age, this feature only works if you have Google Signals enabled, which is almost completely true. There is actually an interim step that you can get this to work. But I do recommend enabling Google Signals. It'll also give you some ability to track users across devices, which if you imagine that somebody might find you on their phone, but then actually finish purchasing on their computer, and you'd love to be able to know that it's the same person. It's not perfect with Google Signals enabled, but at least some of the time Google can track that is in fact the same person. There's a few other settings on my checklist. If we go back to my checklist, I won't pull all of these up. These are settings if you just go into Google Analytics settings, excluding URL query parameters. That basically just reduces garbage when you're looking at pages and page view reports. Like otherwise, a perfect example is you might have seen this in your analytics, that if you're using Facebook ads at all, Facebook appends this FB CLID parameter, and that'll show up when you're looking at page views. So you'll end up with like all these single page views because it's like your home page / FB CLID equals blah, blah, blah. And there's one view of that, but in fact, that's just somebody looking at your home page. By default, Google Analytics tracks bots and crawlers, and there's a setting to stop it from doing that, which I highly recommend enabling. I do also might recommend creating a view in Google Analytics that doesn't filter that out, just so that you have a way of comparing. Like, let's see that you find, like, your website's getting slow and you think maybe there's a lot of traffic. Well, it could be bot traffic, and so having one view in Google Analytics where you can see all that traffic is helpful. Tracking site search is another great feature, and I'm going to pull up an example of this. So if we go into in a different account, not the Google Analytics demo account, just because this one, the Google Analytics demo account, for some reason, they're not actually effective. Their site search tracking isn't working. So this is an account that we work with at 2 Octobers that is it's a nonprofit that helps people with Parkinson's, and this is site search data from their website. So what this means is that 69 people in this time period went and just searched nutrition, and 24 people searched sleep and DBS. And this is hugely valuable for understanding what people are looking for. So if you're an e-commerce website, this is a treasure trove of data for, here are the kinds of products that people who visit my site are most interested in. And there's other ways to kind of get at that information, but this is one of the best and simplest. And it can tell you a few things. One is that maybe you should be thinking about expanding a product line, but another is just making these products more visible because these are the ones that people are most interested in finding. Linking Google Ads to your analytics account, and I'll switch back here and show you just sort of the power of that. And this is what it should look like. And if it doesn't for you, then something is not working right. So if I go to acquisition, Google Ads, and campaigns, then what you should see is your campaigns here, clicks here, and users and sessions over here, and cost all in a row. If you see a row that says not set and it has a whole bunch of stuff happening, then something's a little bit broken. And here there's a little bit. It's not a minuscule percentage of sessions. It's a little more than 20% of sessions that are in this not set category. And what that means is that there's something about that configuration that's broken. If you go through any of these things and you're like, okay, this doesn't appear to be working correctly, right now I really just want to give you this checklist, but we can talk more in office hours, or you could just reach out to me directly and we can talk about it later. If you're like, okay, that it does look like it's broken on my website, and if you're not sure how to fix it, we can definitely help. The last two things I want to mention, I'm going to talk a little bit about UTM tagging later on, but UTM tagging is the process of tagging ads or messaging in emails, on Twitter, on Facebook, on links from other websites, putting a little bit of code at the end of the URL that points to your website so that you can, it shows up in a way that you can identify it in Google Analytics. And to give you an example of that, we go to the acquisition all traffic source medium report. And again, I'm on the demo account, the Google Merchandise Store. They have a few cases here where they're using UTM codes, like this partner's affiliate means that for this to show up this way, it means that they've stuck this code on the end of the URL. And I'll get back to that in a little bit, but that's also on my sort of top, let's see, what is it, 8 must do settings. And then the last thing that I have to mention is accurate goal tracking. And the reason I have to mention it is that, like, I've literally looked at thousands of Google Analytics accounts in the, it's been, I've been working with Google Analytics since before Google bought it and it was called Urchin. So it's nearly 20 years of working Google Analytics. And so in that time, I looked at a lot of accounts, and most of the time, goal tracking isn't set up properly. That what happens is that somebody sets up goals, but then the website gets changed and the goals don't get updated. And so the last thing that I strongly recommend doing is going through your goals, looking at them, and so if we go to conversions, goals, overview, looking at each of the goals that you have set up, and actually thinking, okay, what do I think this is tracking? Going and doing it on your website and verifying that it is actually tracking the way that you expect it. So again, quick list of top configurations before I get into the meaty stuff. Any pressing questions before we move on? And mostly I wanted to introduce this to you, and the document has some more detail. Yeah, somebody said something.
That was me. I was gonna say, we got a question about the audience report in Google Analytics, and the question is, do you prefer the audience or the demographics data in Google Analytics over a different source, for example, Google Ads?
I don't necessarily prefer, I mean, in the case of Google Ads and Google Analytics, they actually come from the same place, which is association with Google Ads tracking for ad placements on the Google Ad Network. That's how Google associates demographics data with users. So the source is the same, so they're kind of equally valid. I mean, I guess I would say both are useful. It's really, and we're going to step through an example of this. It's really great to have it in Google Analytics because you can get a feeling of how people are interacting with your content. So it's nice to have it in Google Ads to be able to do things like bid adjustments and audience targeting. But I would say essential to have in Google Analytics to understand things about the demographics of your audience. Okay, oh, it's like we had a question and an answer, so that's good. Talking about how to use Google Analytics to get at attribution. Barely. And that is a subject I would love to talk about that during office hours, and I actually think that might be good, a good time to talk about it because there's definitely not a right answer, so it's good to get different perspectives. So, all right. So I'm going to move to GA as a tool for analysis. All right. So the example that I want to walk through, I'm going to walk through is going to get into demographics, and so I'm going to stay in the Google Merchandise Store for now. But one of the things that so I teach analytics to university students, and most of my students are they're marketing majors, they're business analytics majors, they're graduate students. So they're I don't know, you know, they're smart, curious, pretty well qualified, have a good background to be doing this kind of work. And one of the things that I notice is that with a tool like Google Analytics, it's really easy to just come in here and just start poking around and just sort of being like, huh, I wonder what that is. And looking at reports and sort of wondering like, what's the report I should be looking at? And I mean, there's definitely value in that from as far as like understanding Google Analytics. But if you really want to use Google Analytics as a tool for analysis, you should be thinking like, what is the question that I want to answer? What is my hypothesis? Like, and hopefully all of us has some interest in marketing. That's definitely the perspective that I'm talking about things from. So an example of a hypothesis is if I'm in charge of the Google Analytics, the Google Merchandise Store, and I go here, I go to acquisition, and I look at all traffic, and I look at the source medium, and let's say that I add age as a secondary dimension here. And I guess just so you make sure you saw what I did there, I clicked on this secondary dimension, and then I just typed age, and then I had to scroll down to find that age field. So one of the things that I notice is I'm like, oh, well, look, this is, I mean, far and away, the biggest category is 25 to 34, then 18 to 24, then I got 35 to 44. But my audience definitely skews younger. And so something that a lot of marketers will do is they'll say, okay, well, you know, what we do is really mostly aimed at younger people. So my hypothesis as the person in charge of the Google Merchandise Store is that I really should be focused on a younger audience. And that's a reasonable hypothesis at this point. So we're going to test out that hypothesis. So the first thing I mean, one thing that I can do is I can go to demographics and age, and I can start to get a sense of this data here. And again, it confirms that I have the vast majority of traffic coming from people that are 18 to 34. But I want to dig a little bit deeper. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add segments. And in analytics, we have a bunch of default segments. But what I want to do is I want to compare age group. So I'm going to create 2 segments here. And I'm going to call one of them and I'm going to specify that these people fall in the 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 age groups. One of the nice things that analytics does as I'm working on segments is over here on the right, it shows me where, what percentage of my traffic falls into this segment. This is a fairly simple segment. I can actually, if I want to, start to add more complicated conditions, and I can do things like greater than, less than, contains, does not contain, and then I can do multiple conditions. So I can get super sophisticated with the segments that I create. But for now, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to save. Okay, now I'm going to add another segment. And since I'm in this next up segment, I'm not going to call it older. I'm going to call it less young visitors. So now it's updated. One interesting thing you might notice is that if you were paying attention, that the last segment I applied was, it was a little under 30%. This is 14%. Why doesn't that, like we've selected all possible age groups, right? Like, how come it doesn't equal 100%? Well, we haven't actually selected all possible age groups because Google Analytics doesn't have a segment for people under 18, but also analytics doesn't assign age and gender to all visitors. They get that data from people that are opted into ad network tracking, which is something that you may be and not actually realize that you are, but not all users are. So they can't, usually we see somewhere around sort of 35 to 40% of users they can actually assign age and gender to. Which means take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, or maybe a reasonable sized grain of salt. Just because if you're only able to assign that to a subset of users, you can't necessarily say definitively that you've got the complete picture of differences in behavior by age or gender or other demographic characteristics. So I'm going to save this segment. And if you're wondering what I'm doing here is I don't want this segment to appear in other Google Analytics views. So I'm just clicking this little change link up here and I'm saying I only want it to appear in this view. And that's just because I have access to a whole bunch of analytics accounts. Helps keep things from being too cluttered. Okay. So now, applying these segments to the age report is useless. Because that report is already about age. But what I can do now is I can do things like come to the channels report. And now I can start to view data throughout Google Analytics. And again, like if you didn't catch what I did there, there's this little arrow here. Just some reports they may not all fit on your screen, and so you can actually close this navigation by clicking that arrow. So now I get to see younger versus older visitors. So here's a really striking thing. is, so my first instinct was, well, most of my visits are younger people. That's my target audience. But now we see that actually most of my revenue is coming, or more of my revenue is coming from people 35 and older, and my conversion rate is actually 3 times what it is for younger visitors. And if you're looking at those conversion rates and saying, holy smokes, that's terrible, it is. It's something to be aware of is the Google Merchandise Store is largely frequented by Google employees. And I think there's something weird about, like, maybe they don't actually need to complete a purchase, that maybe they use like whatever Google credits or something. I don't know, because otherwise this is an abysmally low e-commerce conversion rate. Let's see. So once I have these segments applied, I can I can use them to start to test my hypotheses about different things, like am I losing people on landing pages and whatnot. But my first insight is just this sort of broader insight of, it's shown me as groups, everybody that's younger or less young, and how they perform. So another thing that I'm curious about is that as a marketer, I know that mobile device usage tends to be more common among the younger users versus older users. So I could go here and add in a secondary dimension if I wanted to further start to break down the behavior of younger versus older users, and start to get into, okay, where am I gaining or losing people? Here, bounce rates are actually surprisingly similar. That's something like sometimes I might expect to see mobile performance be worse. So these secondary dimensions are extremely useful, again, as a tool for investigation to start going a little deeper. So my first hypothesis was younger versus older. Now I might want to explore other characteristics of that audience to see if I can refine my picture a little bit more. So now let's say that you're somebody who's like, okay, well, just give me data, give me more data. This is nice, but I want to throw it in Excel where I'm comfortable making pivot tables and that sort of thing. I want to show you another nifty trick that you can do with this data. For this, I'm actually going to turn off these segments. And what I wanted you to see is not specifically like younger versus older visitors, but just this idea that like you might sell in the US and Canada, and it makes sense to create, sorry, there's a little music in the background. Pleasant. Okay. So like Canada versus the US, if you sell in the EU, you might want to do EU versus US, international markets, create segments for those. That's something I've done a lot, is to create different segments for, or it could be even sales regions. Just that idea of trying to understand your audience and breaking them into broader segments versus some of the more granular analysis that you get if you go into some of the audience reports. The next thing that I want to show you is under customization. So I refer to the idea that maybe you like to go deeper in your analysis and you like to have more data to work with. This is one of my favorite tricks in Google Analytics, which is, so I'm going to, I went into age, I had device, and now what I want to do is look by country, and I want to get like all of these dimensions. So the first thing I'm going to do is that in ordinary Google Analytics reports, you can only get 2 dimensions. You can get a primary dimension and you can add a secondary dimension. There are a few reports that have 2 dimensions by default, but for the most part, no. But if I go to a custom report, I have the ability to say I want a flat table. So now what I can do is I can go and I can say I want age as a dimension. I want device category as a dimension. And I want country as a dimension. Then I can, for now, I'm not going to go all the way through this, but I've got sessions, you can do transactions. So I can pick different metrics here, and then I'm going to save this. And one thing to be aware of is you can create custom reports, and then you can still apply segments to them. So I could have, if I wanted to, get rid of the age segments and then pull up the, I'm sorry, get rid of age as a dimension and then pull up my segments if I wanted to just look at it that younger and less young segment. So, so now I've got these multiple dimensions, and if you're a data geek, this is super powerful, right? You can break this down. You can have country, and you can have region, and you can have city. You can and this is actually something I do if I want to analyze data in Tableau, is I create this report and I export country, region, city, and then when I import it into Tableau, I get that granular geographic data that Tableau requires if you want to create data on a map. So then if I wanted to export this, one thing, one important trick to be aware of is it'll export how much you're looking at. So this report has 471 rows, so I'm going to change this to 500 rows before I export, and then go up here and export, and I'll go ahead and export it into a Google Sheet. And then I have this lovely data set that I can play around with. So another nifty data analysis trick. In the handout, I've got a few more sort of tips and tricks for analysis. I'm not going to walk through each of those, but if you're following along with the handout at all, on page 7, I go through a few more things, but I want to move on to the next meaty section, which is getting into calculating ROI. So I might actually drag my document over here just because it has a little visual, which is nice. So calculating marketing ROI, and if anybody joined late, this is a document that Maggie sent out before the sent out to the email address we had for you before you signed on. So check that email address, and you should have this document. Okay, so we're going to talk a little talk about return on ad spend. This is the main metric that most e-commerce marketers use for evaluating performance, and it's the revenue. It's revenue generated divided by ad spend. Probably most of you are familiar with this formula. So if overall I spent $5,000 or pounds or euros or whatever, and I earned $20,000, then I generate $4 for every dollar I spent. And this is a key calculation. What I wanted to show here is actually just a really simple It's just a really simple trick, but it's kind of unsatisfying in Google Analytics how we get, if we go to acquisition and we have Google Ads and Google Analytics linked, we get this nifty cost data, but we don't, so we only get that if for Google Ads, if we have it linked. With our regular reports, if we go to, for example, this channels report, there's no cost data that shows up here. And there is a way that you can import cost data into Google Analytics and associate it with sources and mediums and campaigns. But, and some of you may be doing this, would love to hear from you later if you are. I've found it to be really tedious to maintain. So it's possible maybe there's a few platforms that have integrations and you can get it pretty easily. And what that means is that you actually have to use the Google Analytics API to load that data in. So what I wanted to point out here is that from just a pure, like if you're a marketer and you want to do analysis, what I like to do is export from here. I'm going to go ahead and export this into a Google Sheet again. And I'm just going to close this sheet, keep things sort of tidy. So now in the handout, there's a link to this document. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the default channel grouping users, transactions, and revenue from here. And I have to do it a little piecemeal. I'm just doing paste values so I don't mess up my my formatting. And oh, I guess I could have done those two at once. Oops. Paste special, paste values, and then I want transactions and revenue. Okay, then the thing, one of the things that I think, well, one of the things that the Google Analytics doesn't do well, and why it's useful to have a sheet like this as a resource that you maintain, and there are certainly ways that you can automate feeding data into here, and if that sounds exciting to you, it's one of the things that Google 2 Octobers does best, is automating getting data into sheets like this from different sources. But being able to really understand marketing ROI across the board. So what I have this sheet set up to do is that you just enter these values manually. And I think one of the most important things is that you have the ability and that you start assigning costs to like organic search. Because if you're paying somebody on staff or externally to do organic search, it does have a cost to it. And people, sometimes you'll hear people talk about how the ROI on organic is like infinite. But anybody that's had to pay an invoice to an SEO agency or consultant knows that that's not true. And even if what you're doing is internal staff that's creating content, that still is time and money. It is an investment. So having a way to account for those costs, and then all this is doing is just giving me this overall view of what is my revenue divided by what I paid. I included CPA here just because sometimes that's a useful number to keep track of, because especially if you're in an industry where you're likely to get a lot of repeat customers, you may want to look at cost per acquisition versus return on ad spend. Again, I'd love to, if you found it a fast and more elegant way to import data and do it that it's easy to maintain into Google Analytics, please stick around. But this is the best way that I have found. I might just pause for any questions out there before I move to the next step.
And we haven't had any in the chat since the last one, but please feel free to send them over chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask Nico.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a question before we move on, if that's okay.
Great. Yeah, please.
Hi. So basically, you get to CPA, essentially what you just shown us is you need to export the data from that report that you pull in Google Analytics, and then you just need to manually import your cost data for the different media channels. I mean, assuming that you don't have something sophisticated that you could pipe in, you know, from another source or use Tableau or something. I mean, the most basic approach is just to create a new row and fill it in. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually I noticed something that I made it look harder than it was because I actually have this sheet set up. I had some hidden columns in my sheet. So I went and copied it column by column, but in fact you can, the sheet is set up so that it drops things into the right place, because if you notice I have some hidden columns here. And I just did that to make it look a little cleaner. So yeah, and I mean, especially because some of those costs, like organic search, if you do emails, again, sending out emails takes time and costs money, but it's a harder cost to attribute. And I mean, you know, one of the things that we do is we manage people's Google Ads and Facebook campaigns, and we don't do it for free. So Google Analytics might show what you paid for the ad itself, but it doesn't show you what you paid your agency to manage it. So having a tool like this is a great place to get a more accurate view of CPA and ROAS, or ROAS as people often call it.
And Nico, we had another question in chat. So do you use goal value?
I do sometimes. In this case, this is pulling from the e-commerce data. The times that I've used goal value, there are a few different instances, and I'll give two use cases where I have. One is if I'm doing, if I'm tracking leads and I have a defined value for different types of leads. So let's say that I'm a real estate brokerage and I have, we do commercial and residential real estate. I'm probably assigning a different value to a commercial lead versus a residential lead. So in that case, I probably would put a goal value in there and a hard value, a dollar value. So generally, if it's e-commerce I'm tracking, I'm using the e-commerce data. Most of the time, if I want to kind of interpret the value of leads differently, I do it outside of Google Analytics. I'm not using the goal value. That is an example of a use case. The other use case where I might is if I'm importing that data back into Google Ads and using it for optimization. A nice trick is that you can assign different values. So let's say that somebody signs up for your mailing list, and you want to count that, but that's not worth as much as if they fill out a lead form. And that's not worth as much as if they actually make a purchase. So using those goal values and then importing that data back into Google Ads, and then you can do ROAS optimization in Google Ads based on those values. even if you're not actually selling anything. Like the idea of ROAS in Google Ads is really geared towards if you're generating product revenue, but by assigning different goal values, you can actually use the ROAS feature in the automated bid strategies in Google Ads, importing those values. And I think that could be really useful. And the reason that's important is there is no ability in Google Ads to weight goals, right? Like an intuitive way to do that would be to say, I'm going to give this a quarter of the value in Google Ads as this other thing, but you can't do that in Google Ads. A conversion is a conversion is a conversion. But what you can do is have used a conversion value and use a automated ROAS bid strategy, which is getting into sort of advanced Google Ads. Another topic we could touch on in office hours. Okay, let me move forward. So I'm going to say, just in the interest of time, the handout goes into UTM parameters pretty well. So I don't want to take the time to explain UTM parameters and UTM tracking. I mentioned before that I can set UTM parameters. I can use a tool like this Google campaign URL builder, and I'll just give you a quick example. I'm not going to go through the full explanation. You can get that in the handout. But what that means is that, like, let's say that I'm sending out an email and I want to know when people click on that email and come to my website, and I want to be able to see it in Google Analytics. Well, so I can stick these parameters at the end of my URL, and that tells Google Analytics what email it came from, or what ad on Facebook it came from, or what source it came from. So that's the idea of UTM tagging. So just to give you an example, and this tool is a Google tool. There's a link to it in the handout. I have a feeling this is not going to work, but so the values that I put in here were campaign source and campaign medium, and it looks like it. No, it's weird. There's something up with the Google Merchandise Store, so I'm getting this, I don't have sufficient permissions thing. But now if I go back to Google Analytics and I go to real time, fingers crossed, I can, so real time reporting gives data before it's processed and gone into the regular reports. So now if you look, like that URL I created shows up as source equals workshop and medium equals example, if you see that down here at the bottom of the list. Oh, sorry, not able to highlight it properly. But I mean, how cool is that, right? like I just created this one URL, and now I know exactly where it came from. So if you imagine, like if you send out like a customer email, you might have multiple links in that email, and you want to know which link they clicked on even. Or at least you want to know that they clicked on the July email versus the June email. And so you can track those things using these UTM parameters. That's not the thing that I wanted to go through. That's an important background. What I wanted to show you is that if by default, and I'm going to switch back to this account, which is a client of ours that works with the Parkinson's community. And we go to this acquisition all traffic channels report. One thing that's really unsatisfying about this report is the example I'll go into is social. So it shows social traffic, but it doesn't actually make a distinction between paid social and organic social. And as a marketer, that's a really important distinction to me. So what I want to show you is just a quick trick on how you can be able to, so no, I'll do this one more time just so you see. All right, so I clicked on the gear icon in the lower left to get into settings. I went to the view settings. I went down to channel settings and then channel grouping. So there's this default channel grouping, Somebody's asking, can you separate paid and unpaid social if you tag it differently? And the answer is yes. That's what we're going to talk about. So you can't, I mean, so, all right, what I'm going to do is we've got this default channel grouping, and I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to call this advanced channel grouping. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a new channel, and I'm going to say that the source, I'll say contains, just in case, Facebook, and the medium matches CPC. Oh. Oh. So now what I can do, sorry, is I can come in here and I can add in Twitter. Oops, didn't mean to pop out of there. And I can go and list, so Instagram, Pinterest. So you get the idea. So now I've got like these different sources, and then the medium equals CPC, and I can establish that medium because when I put links in the ads that I run in Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, etc., I can just make sure that I use CPC as my medium. That part doesn't matter. You could say, if you want to, you could say paid social is the medium. You can call it different things. As long as you call it something consistent, you can come back here and identify. So now the important thing to know is that these values execute in order. So what happens is, I'm going to change this to organic social. So what will happen is that when a click comes in and Google Analytics processes it, it's going to go down this list and it's going to check each one in order. So if it gets caught by paid social, then it'll be assigned to paid social. But if it gets missed by paid social, then it'll follow the rules for organic social. And I won't go into the rules there are a little bit complicated, but Google does a similar thing of identifying what the source is. You may have noticed sometimes they get things wrong. Like I think, trying to recall, there's an important social channel that they don't categorize as social. So you could go in here and modify this and create your own conditions if you see traffic that's not being assigned to organic social that you want to be. But what's important about this idea that it executes in order is that, like, so if you still have stuff out there in Facebook that you haven't tagged properly, doesn't mean you're going to lose it all together. It'll just fall down into organic social. Oh, useful comment. Using medium CPC will get pulled into the paid search channel unless the paid search channel is, well, actually, here we have paid search comes after the paid social. So as long as that's true, that won't happen. Do new channel groupings or updates ones apply back-to-back dates? That's a great question. The no, so that is a problem. If you change your channel groupings or update them, it only applies to traffic going forward. But that's also a good question because that's why I created this advanced channel grouping. I could have gone and edited my default channel grouping, but because Google permanently assigns that channel to that traffic, I can't undo that, so I prefer to create a separate channel grouping. And if you're wondering, okay, so now I've done this and I want to see it in action, you can go to channels, and I'm not going to see anything yet because there's no data, because I just created it. But using this drop down, then I can go, and I think it'll actually still pick up anything that I haven't changed yet. But this is where you'd start to select your channel grouping. In any place where you can pick channel, you can switch the channel grouping from the default to the one that you created. So I've got a few more tricks I want to go through. One thing that I point out in the handout is that you can also use this same technique to separate branded paid search from non-branded paid search, which I like to do, just because bidding on your own brand name, there are a lot of circumstances where I think it is merited, but it doesn't count the same as bidding on keywords that don't include your brand name. So I actually like to treat those as two separate channels, branded and unbranded paid search. And I describe that in the handout as well, how to set that up. Let's see. I want to move on to office hours pretty soon. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of useful tricks that are in the end of my handout, the advanced hacks. So one that I want to show you is, we go back up. So I showed you earlier that ability to create flat table reports. This is a super useful example of creating a flat table report. So I'm going to create a new custom report, and I'm going to call this event detail. Switch to flat table. If you work with events at all, this is one of the most annoying things about Google Analytics, is you can't actually, so events really have 3 dimensions to them. They have a category, an action, and a label, but you can't report on all 3 at the same time, which is so stupid. But if you come here and you create a custom report, I can say event category, event action, and event label, and then I can say event, go total events, and so now I can see all of my event categories, actions, and labels. This is great for just sort of seeing what people are doing in your website, but then chances are I might actually want to add a little bit more detail. So what I might want to do is add channel groupings, because I want to see that sort of, I want to see all the event detail for traffic by channel. So if you've ever been frustrated by the limitations of event reporting, this is a great hack to know. Okay, I'm going to show you one more little trick, and then we're gonna switch over to office hours. And there are a few other things in the the hacks at the end of the document, but I'd like to have time for office hours. So another thing that is really annoying in Google Analytics is this behavior flow report. And if you've ever tried to use it, it can be really confusing. Apparently not very useful. So one thing to keep in mind is that you may have groupings. It may, up in this upper left-hand corner, you want to make sure that it is set to automatically group pages. Then if you want to look at traffic through a certain page, what you can do is, so let's see, which page am I? I'm going to go to the resources page. I'll use this as an example. So I can click on this page. Now I want to explore traffic through the resources page. So I'm going to click on that. Okay. For those of you paying close attention, it didn't actually do anything. So now I'm going to click on it again. You see that? So now I get to see traffic that flows through the resources page. I'm going to make this a little smaller so I get to see a bit more. So now I get to see the resources page, and I get to see where people came from, and I get to see where they went to. But here's the coolest thing, and I feel like, I mean, honestly, this to me is the coolest hidden feature that is hidden behind a bug in Google Analytics, because you have to click on that explore traffic through here thing twice to get to it. Because it doesn't work for the first time for some reason. But now I can actually see where people go from and where people come from before they get to this page. So I can actually get a much better sense of how people are flowing through my website, which is I think one of the worst limitations of Google Analytics otherwise. So if you've got a page on your website and you really want to understand where people are coming from and where they're going to, this is an incredibly useful little trick. So, all right. Those are the things that I wanted to talk about. Let's switch back to here. We covered measuring channel performance. We went through demos. I want to, before we go into office hours, we do have some upcoming workshops next Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. Maggie, our lovely host, is leading with Karen, who I think she's still here. They're going to be talking about paid search on social for multi-location businesses. We've got a few more coming up. There's a link. You'll give me, I mean, this presentation, there isn't a lot to it. I think I actually have a link to the workshops in my handout as well. So you can see what else is coming up. Let's see. And I have to plead to you, and this link is kind of long. Oh, where did it go? So I've submitted for Denver Startup Week, which is also online and free, regardless of whether or not you're in Colorado, to attend. I'm presenting this session with Jamie Latorra, who works at rover.com, and we're going to be talking about storytelling with Data Studio. And the way that Denver Startup Week works is they pick sessions based on who gets the most votes. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to, in a shameless plug for myself and Jamie, who's awesome. I am going to post this in the chat. I think you have to create a login or associate it with a Facebook or Google account or something to be able to vote. But I would love it if you attended the session, and even if you don't attend the session, I'd still love it if you voted for it. So let's see. We are done. There's contact information for me. I mentioned reach out to me if there's any of these things you'd like to go into in more depth. To October's, part of our, we love helping people with analytics, helping set up analytics. We do a lot with Data Studio, Google Tag Manager, but we also love teaching too. So we are happy to work with you, helping you do stuff and teaching you how to do stuff. So if any of that sounds interesting, please reach out. And I think that is the end.